So this week is the last week for the readings. I just got finished reading them, and I'm going to go ahead and answer the questions that we've been asked to answer. First one is, in what ways have your experiences been global this semester? Well, I would say the most clear way for my experience to be global is one, to be living in a different country where the stereotypical normal things are different, such as the way the road traffic patterns work, the way the weather is, those sorts of things. Small, subtle differences that, for a day or two at home you wouldn't necessarily, think much of. But after living here for, several months, you start to pick up on, and then you start to kind of adapt to it and overcome. One example would be the currency. In Scotland, they use the British pound sterling, which is shaped differently, has different colors, the coinage is different sizes than the United States coins. Um, After being here for 2.5 months, I've gotten so adjusted to it that as I was showing one of my friends, what U.S. currency looks like, it actually felt weird in my hands, and it wasn't even so much of a mental thing; it was just like a physical muscle memory, so to speak, that holding the U.S. currency actually felt different than what it was supposed to, because for the last 2.5 months I've been holding something different. The other way is I've gotten the opportunity here at the University of Sterling to live with other people other than Americans. On my floor there are about 4 Americans, and in my hall I'm the only one. So all of my flatmates, all the people I live with and I cook with and clean with, are from different countries, primarily Scotland, but there's also some people from Germany, and there's also some people from the Czech Republic. And so what that's done is it kind of allowed me to look at things and talk to people who don't have the same American perspective. Yes, this is great. This way we've been taught, the bias in history and politics that we've been taught, doesn't exist in the same way as it does when I'm talking to them, because they've been taught differently. And it's just been a really good experience to kind of get to know other people, not just on what's your perspective on this global issue, but also just as an individual person. It's interesting to see how similar people from, in this case, Scotland, Germany, United States, Czech Republic, how similar all of us are on like a social sort of level. But then when it comes to the political spectrum, it's very different. But it's also been very helpful in teaching me and allowing me to kind of explore and say, I look at it this way, but hey, what's your perspective on it? You're halfway across the world. You look at it from a completely different perspective. And in that case, I think it's been a very global experience thus far. Second question is, can Americans be global citizens? Well, I would say absolutely. There's no reason not to, and there's no reason we can't be. If anything, it's easier for us because we have more freedom of travel than many other countries. The reading mentioned that she didn't feel as though she could be a global citizen because she was looked at as an American the entire time she was there. She was treated as such. The family she stayed with was treating her as if she was just an honored guest rather than a member of the family. And while in her particular circumstance, I wholeheartedly believe that she had that experience and that it didn't feel like she was necessarily one with them because she couldn't assimilate and blend in the culture as well. But in my case, because I'm in a predominantly similar, from a physical standpoint, from a visual standpoint, it looks very similar to Scottish people. English is primarily spoken, so there's not necessarily, well, there is an accent difference, but there's not really a language gap. I can easily communicate with people who I've never talked to before. They don't have to know a special language in order to communicate with me. I don't have to know an additional language to communicate with them. And so what this has done is it's kind of allowed me to very easily integrate into the Scottish culture and into the different cultures that are within Scotland. And in that sense, I would say I've become a much more global citizen because I've managed to, from my experiences in the past and from what I'm dealing with now, look at things from not just a U.S. perspective, but say looking at it from a British perspective, looking at decisions made in Parliament. There's the referendum and the voting coming up and going, what would I do in this particular case? And a lot of the times, when there's politics on, especially on foreign policy, like such as the issues in Libya, I look at the U.S. response, I look at the British response, and I think, I see where they're coming from. I don't even agree with, the U.S. perspective as I probably would have blindly agreed to, being back in the United States and having never been outside of the States. But since being here, I've had a much better opportunity to sort of reach out and become much more global. So I think it's definitely possible for Americans to become global citizens, and I think it's actually easier than anyone else. And although we are somewhat, as people often say, isolated from the rest of the world because of the ocean gap, I feel like that's still somewhat of a false statement, because if you walk through the main town in Sterling, you'll run into a few Americans. It's one of the most popular international student places to come from, an international student. And although, as it also pointed out in the article, Americans, we have the prestige, the wealth, and it's looked at as being like more of an upper class, citizen, like in at least the writer's perspective. Um, there's nothing we can do. We shouldn't be ashamed of the fact that we have more opportunity to travel and more opportunity to that. Rather, we should use that as a reason to go to these places, to go to the places that for example, the family couldn't, to understand why there are those barriers for other people. By the fact that we don't have a barrier, or at least not as much of a barrier, that our passports allow us to go in and out wherever we want, we should use that to our advantage to help, explain and figure out why not everyone can, why everyone else can't do that. And by being basically the holder of the key, we need to be the ones who go out and make these decisions. So I think as Americans, we have a responsibility more than anyone else, or at least more than citizens who are in these impoverished nations, to go out there and be more global, be more aware, and actually make some changes. The third one is, have you grown to think and act as a global citizen? Well, I feel like that question kind of mingles into the way I responded to the last question, but I'll kind of go out a bit more. I would say it definitely does. The way of looking at world issues, and for example, use the Libya crisis, has been changed since I've been here. I've met people who live in Africa who are part of the former British colonies, and although they're not former Libyan students, they look at it and say, this is what's going on. This needs to be fight. And although all this atrocities are going on, there's a lot of things that, from the American and even the BBC World Service perspective, they show these different things, and they're somewhat biased, and even in the way they report, to help us somewhat justify our stances on different things. The other thing I wanted to touch up on is the other article mentioned that using the global awareness as part of a standard requirement has been somewhat encouraged, but it's that there was also a way to fight boredom. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. There's definitely no shortage of things to do over here or anywhere, so to speak.